So here we are once again for another episode of On the Porch with Pastor, and I feel like I feel like Noah post flood here. It's been raining like crazy today, but we're going to continue in our study reading of Front Porch Tales by Philip Gully, and tonight's episode is When the Tree Went Crashing. A friend of mine has a bunch of college degrees. I was really impressed until he told me he was going to another city to deliver a paper. Heck, I was delivering papers in the fourth grade. One of my customers was a Quaker widow named Mrs. Harvey. When weather permitted, she'd sit on her front porch swing, waiting for the paper and a conversation. I'd pull up a rocking chair and we'd sit and visit underneath the shade of the maple tree which stood guard over the porch. One day she asked me if I would work as her yard boy. She had a big yard, almost 2 acres, which she wanted mowed with a push mower since riding mowers didn't do a very good job. She was emphatic about that, and since I didn't have a riding mower, I agreed with her. I'd stop by every afternoon when I was done delivering papers and mow a section. Every afternoon but Sunday, since Mrs. Harvey said that was the Sabbath, and if the Lord needed a rest on the Sabbath, who was I to work? It was in the 4th year of my mowing that I noticed the front porch maple tree was dying. It had some years on it. Mr. and Mrs. Harvey had moved there the first year of their marriage 40 years before. Mr. Harvey had planted it then. 20 years from now, we'll appreciate this, he said at the time. And 20 years later, they did appreciate it, on a summer evening when the heat would loosen its grip. But after 40 years, Mr. Harvey was dead. So was the tree. When I told Mrs. Harvey, she stared at the tree the longest time, told how she still remembered, what her husband was wearing when he planted that tree. Then she went in her house and called Kenny. He was the man in our town who cut trees. He rolled up the next day in his truck and got right down to business. Another day, another tree. Mrs. Harvey was watching from her front porch swing, along with her neighbor, who had made her way over to offer comfort. So, when the chainsaw bit into the tree and Mrs. Harvey flinched, her neighbor took her hand and listened while Mrs. Harvey talked about summer evenings that were supposed to be, but never were. Once spent a whole semester studying the book of Job. Never did understand it until I read it in light of Mrs. Harvey. Job had it all. Then Job lost it all. Servants murdered. Wealth stolen. Health gone. Sons and daughters and bounce-on-your-knee grandchildren dead. Job sat on a pile of ashes, lamenting over a life that was supposed to be, but never was. God made his way over to Job and sat with him amidst the charred remains of his life. A tender thing, given the immensity of the universe and the smallness of Job. But then God knows our secret pain. When I was in college, my philosophy professor spent an entire week talking about love. But for me, it was never clearer than the day the tree went crashing. And that concludes this evening's edition of On the Porch with Pastor. Sometimes we remember things just like Mrs. Harvey that were dear to us. They were important when we were young. But as we get a few years in the rearview mirror, we realize that we process them a little better and we're able to value them a little more. I'm fond of saying that I've always enjoyed my life. For the most part, that's true. Be that as it may, as I age, I appreciate it a lot more. It's my hope that that will continue, come what may, because I believe it's very true that life is precious, it's sacred. And that fact, that truth, isn't changed by negative circumstances or the hardships that we encounter along our journey. When we rightly realize how fragile we are, and that a loving God with a purpose higher than we can fathom has us in the palm of his hand, we people of faith can rejoice in that. You may have a more difficult journey than I, but when we look at that in the light of eternity, we know that God has promised that if by faith we'll trust him, then those who have the more difficult journey here will have the more blessed reward in eternity. So whether we prosper on this earth or whether we struggle on this earth, whether we are on the mountaintop perpetually here or whether we feel like we live in the valley underneath the underneath the anthill, as it were, we can draw comfort in knowing that whether on the mountain or in the valley, the Lord is with us, and that he promises to make all things right in the end. That's pretty comforting. And I'm sure that's what Mrs. Harvey was comforted with on that day. But anyway, that concludes our time together. I don't want to ramble on, but so good to have you with us again tonight. And God bless you. Keep your eyes on the skies, because Jesus is coming soon.